Hey there, it's Wayfair here, where delivery and setup are as easy as a few taps on your phone. You're relaxing in an old hammock, scrolling Wayfair's app, when you spot it, a brand new patio set. Next thing you know, Wayfair delivers it right to your patio and sets it up. Oh, you need a new grill too? All right, Wayfair's got you covered. With Wayfair's Room of Choice delivery and fast expert setup on qualifying orders, life gets a little easier. Visit wayfair.com or the Wayfair app.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. Tom, what do we got?
We are going to be looking at basically the hunt after the fact, the hunt for John Wilkes Booth, who on his network of conspirators, and what eventually led to his capture and then ultimate killing by Union soldiers in April 1865.
Yeah, the famous or infamous 12-day manhunt for John Wilkes Booth.
And it was a huge manhunt.
It was
10,000 soldiers. Like, he was the most wanted. When you talk about like America's most wanted, this guy was America's most wanted.
Exactly. Like before the term like public enemy number one was coined later on in like the 20s.
Like, that's it.
This guy was definitely
They were looking for him. They had to find him. Remember, like, people don't realize Lincoln was killed and he was actually being put to rest. The funeral procession was going through the country and they still didn't have the guy who killed him. They knew who did it. They just couldn't find him yet. So it had to happen. There's no way they could not capture this guy.
And I think that, oftentimes the actual narrative of this is told through like the Lincoln assassination, and the whole Booth chase is like an afterthought. So we thought we talked about
Booth
this.
dies, but there's a lot to it, and it's been coming out like I think in more recent years too. There's been more documentaries. There's been books in the past about it, but more people are looking into it.
A book called Manhunt, awesome. If anyone has a chance to read it. Although, I mean, reading's kind of tough these days, right? Tom, how often do you read?
I read all the time.
So do I, actually. I find time to read. That's what my go-to. I probably, like, if I had to count how many books I read in 2021, I honestly could not count. Because I probably read roughly five, 6 books, maybe 5 books a month. Kind of nuts.
I read like 3 or 4 books every night.
All right, whatever.
Well, they're children's books. I'm reading those golden books are great and stuff like that. But I'm reading a couple of those every night.
Oh, dude, that was good. That was good.
They're great.
Well, yeah, you do have like a 3-year-old there. So yeah,
keeps busy. Keeps me busy.
That keeps you busy. Anyway, so let's talk about John Wilkes Booth. Obviously, the chase for Booth starts with the actual assassination.
On April 14th, right? 1865, yeah. We all know what happens, right? John Wilkes Booth, he shoots Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater, right?
Yep.
He had his motivations, right? He's a Confederate sympathizer, though he never actually fought in the war. And he got kind of like, he felt like a coward because of that. So a lot of people say also he wanted attention. And he did plan prior to this to actually kidnap Lincoln. That was the first plan. But then as the war was closer coming to an end, he kind of realized now to do something much more intense in order to save the Confederacy. As long as there's still a Confederacy left to save, that's kind of like what he thought and what he believed. We all know what happens after that. He sneaks in because he was well known. He's able to.
Well, that's the thing. I think we need to touch upon the fact, like, this guy was, by every definition, this like early American heartthrob.
His family was well known too.
Very famous. 26 years old, by the way. Super popular, very recognizable stage actor of his day, which is also why, once he shoots Abe Lincoln in the back of the head and then jumps down on the stage, like, people know who he is.
And they know what he looks like. It's not like it's...
This, people knew his face. He was a very famous American actor. And as you said, he was definitely a Confederate sympathizer. And it was his parents that talked him out of joining the war effort. They're like, dude, like, it was a family of actors. Like, we have money, we have a status, like, we are, known, like, you are not. That's not gonna happen. But he had this like ongoing, would you say obsession? I would say obsession, right? Yeah,
it was definitely an obsession. And then as the war came closer to an end, it got even worse. He's a coward now, like, because he didn't fight for it. He believed in it. Now he has to do something to where he believed in. He actually sent letters to his sister. Talk about, don't open it until my death, and in it we'll talk about it later, but he talks about like why he did what he did was because I had to follow my convictions. He really believed that he was an instrument of God, that Lincoln was a tyrant, and that he had to kill Lincoln, and he was simply doing God's work on Earth by
Yep.
getting rid of Lincoln. So it
Yep.
was like really, he had these really strong beliefs that led him down this road.
Nuts. And he is a native of Maryland, by the way, which was a slave state. However, it was a slave state that chose to stay in the Union, known as one of those border states. And he hated abolitionists, very outspoken about
Yeah,
abolitionists. He thought they were trying to destroy the country that he loved because, he identified with that, the slave owning majority, I guess. So let's do this. As you kind of brought up before, as the defeat's looking increasingly likely for the South, um, Booth gets a bunch of his friends, these co-conspirators, and they hatch this plan, as you mentioned, in '64 to kidnap Lincoln, um, which they thought could save the Confederacy. But by April, it becomes very obvious that the war is all but over. Like, it's done.
it's done.
Um, we all know the stage. It is in Ford's Theater. There's a play that's going on. It is a funny play. As we also know, John Wilkes Booth knows the people at this particular establishment. He actually gets his mail there. He has like his P.O. box there. So he learns that Lincoln's going to be there that morning. He goes to the theater, to get his mail, finds out Lincoln is going to be there that night. And then things kind of go into motion. He gets a few other conspirators who are supposed to assassinate essentially everyone in succession to the
Yeah.
highest office.
Johnson was supposed to be assassinated, right? Like
Yep. Seward.
Powell, the whole
Yep.
bunch
Seward.
of those,
So
Seward gets stabbed, right? But he fights him
Seward
off.
gets stabbed, like hardcore stabbed. Yeah. But
Yeah.
he survives. Here comes the night. John Wilkes Booth actually drills a hole in the small door behind the presidential box. When Lincoln gets in there, he's watching him through the hole. Again, not going to rehash the story, but there's a funny scene. People laugh, and that's when he uses the perfect opportunity to basically shoot the president in the back of the head. And then he proceeds to jump onto the stage. And everyone's like, whoa, like, wait, first of all, what just happened? And then you start hearing upstairs that the president's been shot. But at the same time, as he jumps down, he screams, right? Thus, death to tyrants.
Yeah, well, that's always one of those. Is that really what he said? Probably something like that. But he screams something, jumps off. As he jumps off, his boot or spur, I guess, gets caught on the curtain. He breaks his leg, and he runs off. But people see him; they know it's him.
Yep.
Like, that's it. They recognize him. They know it's John Wilkes Booth just shot President Lincoln. That's it.
Yep.
That is known from the people inside Ford's Theater at this time. And this is when the manhunt starts, right?
Yeah,
because there's all this pandemonium. People are going crazy, right? Mary Tyler Lincoln is screaming. People are saying, grab that guy. And then the pandemonium, Booth runs out of stage door down the alley. And he gets on a horse that was held from by one of his co-conspirators, right?
Yep.
And that's it. He was on the horse and kind of like got out of there quickly.
And this is interesting because the city itself, Washington, is a closed and guarded city. This is, after all, still a time of war. So you can't really get in and out of Washington unless you went through these specific, what do you call it? I don't want to say booths, but they are booths, I guess. Like, you have these guard booths at all different points that are coming all the roads and bridges that go in and out of the city. So you would think that would stop him, because as he's riding through the night, he is technically stopped, right, at the Navy Yard Bridge, I think, to be specific. And while he's stopped, they're like, yeah, dude, sorry. Like, no one really knows the president's been shot yet. There's no phones.
Yeah, he went through there. He didn't have, there's no phones, lack of telegraphs.
Nothing.
And a lot of the area was like sparsely settled, so he was able to kind of get away.
And it's 9 p.m. Right? It's 9 p.m. Yeah. He gets to the guard, and he basically tells the guard's like, look, you can't leave right now. And Booth's like, yeah, I know, but like, I actually waited because I'm kind of famous, and like, I kind of waited for it to get dark for me to leave, so on and so forth. And the guard's like, oh, okay, fine, and lets him go. And so he actually makes it out into Maryland, right, from D.C.
And he's accompanied by a man named David Harold. We have to talk about this because Harold is going to be with him for a while
through the whole thing, mostly, right? Yeah.
So David Harold, one of his conspirators. Yeah,
he's one of the conspirators. He was supposed to meet. Right as soon as he got out of Washington, D.C., he was supposed to meet with one accomplice, Harold and Lewis Powell, but Powell never makes it. Yeah, so he tries to kill Seward, who is the Secretary of State at the time, and he stabs the bejesus out of him, but Seward lives. Powell runs away, never actually makes it out of Washington, D.C. David Harold, however, does, and he also somehow bribes the guard at the Navy Yard Bridge again, to let him out of Washington, D.C. But still, people don't know yet throughout Washington that this is happening.
Yeah, it's not like now there'd be like I guess a well like
Oh,
massive
please, yeah,
be all
shut
over
down all the
TikTok or whatever,
roads.
yeah, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But
Um,
yeah, it'd be like big news, like
Although
as soon as it
by the
happens.
end of the evening, by within hours, actually, Washington is completely locked down.
Yeah,
And the reason for that is because Secretary of War Edwin Stanton basically takes charge of the federal government, which is later kind of questioned as whether this is something that's constitutional or not, because the Secretary of War literally set up the federal government, the executive branch, inside the front room of the Peterson boarding house where Lincoln was dying in a adjacent room. And he basically just gave all the orders he could, like ask this person, detain this person, find any associate of John Wilkes Booth, shut down Washington D.C. He sent for military police, Pinkerton agent, district metropolitan police force. I mean, he literally just like shut down Washington D.C. and took
no,
over.
they wanted to find this guy.
Yeah,
Like it probably
100%.
constitutionally, yeah, no, not valid, right? It's
Yep,
not his call, but people were listening to him. He took control, he took command, and the goal was find Booth. They
yep.
know it's Booth at this point. The
Yep.
people they know who it is. Let's find this guy.
Well, so by
So
the 15th, right? I mean, literally by the next morning, they found Mary Surratt. And she's
yeah,
important because they, based on interviewing people at night, because they knew it was Booth. So who has Booth been hanging out and seen around town in with? And he's been seen with Mary Surratt's son. So
son.
Mary Surratt owns a tavern in nearby Maryland, but she also owns a boarding house in Washington, D.C. So by the morning of the 15th, so the shooting happened on the night 14th. Morning of 15th, the Metropolitan Police detectives arrive at her boarding house to basically question John Surratt, who they know has been hanging out with John Wilkes Booth. He's not there, but the mom, Mary Surratt, is. When they come back to question her, Mary Surratt later, at that point, who arrives at her boarding house but the third conspirator that was trying to kill Seward, and he kind of couldn't get out of Washington, D.C., so he arrives there. And at that point, they're like, all right, who's this guy? Why is he dressed this bad? Why is this blood over him? So they arrest this guy. They bring him to Secretary of State Seward's family, and they'll identify him like, yes, that's the guy that tried to kill her dad. Boom, right? They have basically one of the conspirators, and potentially Mary Surratt is the other conspirator. So they now have them within 24 hours. They're kind of unraveling what is happening
And
because
they're gonna interrogate them and get more
that's what
information
I'm
from
saying.
them.
Because they're going to interrogate them and they're actually getting information from these people, or at least from one. I wouldn't say that there's conflicting evidence, but some people suggest that
There's a lot of debate
perhaps,
with Mary, right?
yeah, whether Mary was really guilty and all this, or was it
They're
really
not
just
sure.
her
Yeah, they're
son?
saying sometimes she was, sometimes she wasn't, but whatever. Booth did go there, right? And they
Yep,
leave they do leave the tavern heavily armed. They get a lot of
yep,
they get food, but they get weapons also. And then
yep,
that's when they arrive shortly after in Maryland, the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd, right? About 4 a.m. on April 15th.
yep. So here's John Wilkes
And
Booth and his
yeah,
conspirator,
Maryland, yeah,
um,
they're still in Maryland.
and they
They're trying to figure out. They want to get to Virginia, but they're still in Maryland.
and he's obviously really hurt. So that's when
He's
they
hurt. His
stop.
leg's broken. So they go to Mudd's house. Mudd
Yep.
was a town physician. He was a well-known Confederate sympathizer. They don't think he knew who these two men were
Hmm.
and or what they did. They don't think he had any clue. All right. He later proclaimed his innocence. He was sent to prison anyway, but he said, I had no idea. I had these guys come here. He's got a broken leg. I'm a doctor, right? So he sets Brute's broken leg, set him to rest for a few hours. While he was lying in bed, Lincoln was actually dying. Lincoln was dying slowly in Washington. And then when Booth rose, the next morning, they continued riding. They just like started leaving. They just got off right away because they knew they couldn't stay there that long.
Hmm.
And that's when they go to a swamp, right? I think you saw this.
Yep.
This is when they leave there, and then they get into a swamp area, and this is where we're going to kind of hang out here for a while. We're going to hang out in this swamp. I forgot is the exact name of it. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm trying to
Yeah,
look
I don't
through the
remember either.
notes here. But
Well, the issue here too is that they're already being
Ziaka
followed.
Ziaka Swamp. Ziaka Swamp. Yeah, they're already getting followed. The federal agents are on their trail.
Yep. And if they're interrogating basically anyone that they can, they know that they're in Maryland, and the reason they know they're in Maryland is because they were able to figure out like who got out of Washington that night, and they were able to find a sentry at the naval bridge, and they figured out that's the way he took. The two of them took. So they're like, all right, so they're heading in generally this direction, And they started
Yeah.
kind of, that's how they got to the doctor's house. And the doctor's like, yeah, I helped this guy.
Well,
And
the
then,
doctor helped him. You know, when the doctor, what happens, and I saw a couple things of this, I forgot to mention it before, but the doctor basically the next morning read the newspaper or got a telegram, whatever, that he heard that there was a fugitive running that killed the president. He didn't know the president was dead the day before.
Mhm.
So he kind of realized, oh my God, these guys are probably the ones who killed the president. He doesn't turn them in, though, but he does kick them out. And that's why he got thrown in jail. Like, you know, why didn't you turn this guy in? And it would have been in his interest to turn Booth in because they were giving out a $100,000 reward, which in today's
Oh,
in
yeah,
that
it's
money back then,
ridiculous.
that's like $1.6 million. That's
Yeah,
a huge amount of money to just turn these guys in. So I'm sure he would have done it if he knew what they were. I don't care how much you sympathize with the South. All right, you're gonna,
crazy.
1.6 million. You're gonna turn these guys in.
And so by within 24 hours, as far as the police and the United States government know, and the world really knows by this point because newspapers are chugging this out. Within 24 hours, we're searching for two men. We're searching for them. They're traveling together. One of them has a broken leg, and they're hiding somewhere in Maryland. Like that's enough. That's a kind of a lot within 24 hours. Again, it still takes 12 days to get this going. And the reason for that is because Booth and Harold, as they flee, um, they are kind of very good at hiding.
Well, the high,
And
they also when they went into this one swamp, Harold hunted in that area. Well, what happened first is they tried to cross into Virginia, but like the currents took them back to Maryland. They
yeah,
realized they're still in Maryland, but this other part of Maryland, he realized Harold knew where this wooded area, so he knew it very well. He knew good places to hide, and he also knew how to hunt in that area. So he's like, we can actually survive here for a while. I'll be able to do this. And they were saying at times they could actually hear the Union soldiers. They could hear the Union soldiers talking. That's how close they were at times. They would hide in these like very dense pine forests and pine areas and stuff like that. And they were able to just elude capture for 4 days, just hiding out in this swamp slowly.
and that's when they actually wanted to. They were searching for a specific house of another Confederate sympathizer named Colonel Cox,
Yeah,
and they found this local man,
Samuel
Oswald
Cox.
Swan, right? But Oswald Swan
Mhm.
that agreed to guide him to Cox's home, but only if you received a payment. They paid him, and he brought them over to Colonel Cox. But the hospitality didn't really last long because Cox was very well aware that, like, all right, like you have to understand the whole world like is after you right now. The whole nation is after you.
And we're
So
also, I think, with Cox, is that when Booth started reading the letters? Is that when he started
yeah,
getting the?
yep.
Yeah. So what happened was Booth, and this is big too, because Booth thought he was going to be praised as a hero, and then he's starting to read from the newspapers that they're not calling him that; they're calling him a common cutthroat. People are calling him a monster, a madman, and these are even ones, even in the South, like papers that he thought would be supporting him are actually coming out and saying, "I don't think killing Lincoln was the right move."
Yeah.
Right? You have Confederate General Joseph E. Johnson calls it a disgrace to the age. Robert E. Lee comes out against it. All right, a lot of Southerners were kind of like, I'm not saying all Southerners were for it. A lot of Southerners were like, all right, great job, Booth. They did see him as a hero. But a lot of them were like, oh, I think what you did is you just made things worse. Now the North is going to be mad at us. They're going to be vengeful towards us because we killed Lincoln. A lot of them saw Lincoln as kind of like at least someone who wanted to bring the country back together, or at least because Lincoln was outright saying, listen, we're not punishing the South. They don't know what they're going to get with
Yeah.
someone else. So they kind of like knew what they were going to get with Lincoln. They don't know what they're going to get with Johnson. So they were kind of angry at Booth. And even them were saying that there's no need to necessarily kill the guy.
Yeah.
So he was kind of shocked at this. So now I don't know what Booth thought he was going to do. Like, where's he going to go? What was he going to do?
Well, that's kind of where the United States federal government gets pretty good at this because not only do they take over the Surratt Tavern and which is in Maryland, but also the Mary Surratt's boarding house in Washington D.C. They also take over Mudd's farm, Dr. Mudd. Then they basically start rounding up every Confederate sympathizer that is
But they
known to be
know,
a
yeah.
sympathizer in Maryland. So Booth's options are kind of running out because it's like, wait, he can't even turn anywhere. Even Cox is like, you guys have to get out
And even they
because
know, like, if anyone helps him, they're just going to like, even if
yeah,
he gets away, they're just going to like. When I say that, like, the government's going to come and they're going to take everything. They're going to make your life miserable. So you're better off not helping him.
yeah. Oh,
And
that's
that's
the
what
thing.
he
I mean, even
realized.
his own family was arrested. Like they arrested his brothers,
Yeah,
his mother, father. Like everyone's detained for questioning. So it's almost like don't touch Booth, like in any way, shape, or form. Um, so it was very obvious for Booth by like April 23rd, like hiding in the woods in Maryland's not going to cut anymore because there's no more safe houses. There's no more sympathy, no more support. So he needs to get to Virginia. right? Because at the end of the day, Virginia's the heart of the Confederacy. And although Maryland remained in the Union, again,
He thinks he'll be protected there. Yeah.
yeah, it's not as good as he would be protected in Virginia. So, during the night of April 23rd, Booth and Harold successfully crossed the Potomac River. They were in Virginia, not far from the home of Thomas Harbin. Um, Harbin was actually approached as a possible resource during the kidnapping planning stages, way before this. But this time around, he kind of hesitates to help them following the assassination. He's like, no, you can't stay here. Again, this is Virginia. So Booth's like, wait, we're in Virginia. And he's like, yeah, the war's pretty much over. Here's some horses, here's supplies, but I'm not giving you shelter. Just like you need to go. So they
Yeah.
actually ride to Dr. Richard Stewart, who's a relative of Robert E. Lee. Um, and they're like, look, we did this for the Confederacy, your relative Robert E. Lee. And Dr. Stewart also refuses them medical assistance, basically of any kind. He's like, all right, go. And he actually suggests to them, this is interesting, because he says, what you could do is you could go to this other cabin that is now occupied by a black family and you could stay there and hide out. And Booth was like too proud. He was like, what? I'm the, indignity of sleeping in a black man's home. He's like, I'd rather sleep outside. So he just continued.
Well, he sleeps on the porch, I think, doesn't he? Sleep on the guy's
Yeah,
porch.
he like refused to sleep in a house.
So what they start doing by this point too is they're not going around letting people know that they're Booth and Harold. They're going by fake names. They're saying that they're injured Confederate soldiers.
And they actually
Because
get
at this
Confederate
point,
clothes, right? They get Confederate
yeah,
soldier
they get
clothes.
Confederate clothes, yeah, because
Well, the war's over,
yeah,
so a lot of Confederates are wounded
yeah,
and they're coming back
yeah.
home. So they kind of like blend in with that. This idea of like, yeah, we're also returning home. So John Wilkes Booth became John W. Boyd. And they actually hitched a ride with a bunch of soldiers that were ferried over, deeper into
Yeah.
Virginia. And then they rode in a wagon together.
And that's when they meet William Jett, right? Willie Jett.
Yep.
So Willie Jett prepares a house for them to go into, but it was occupied by two unmarried women, and they're like, it's too improper for us to stay here. Like
Yeah.
it's all that like old, that 1860s. It's like, oh no,
Yeah.
these are unmarried women. We can't be seen. We don't want to. Like it's just very. You just killed somebody and you're worried about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you killed
right?
the president of the United States.
What are people going to think? So they continued, and that's when they eventually come to the house of
Richard Garrett, right?
Richard Garrett on April 24th. And they managed to convince Garrett that he and Harold were soldiers and that his broken leg was a war injury from the Battle of Petersburg, I believe, or something like that. And Garrett seemed to believe him at first. And for the first time in a week, Booth actually had a real bed to sleep in and stuff like that. And that's when things start to change. But he was in their house. He was drinking their whiskey. He played with their children. And things. And then eventually Garrett started to grow suspicious of them. He's like, something's going on here.
Yep. And the reason for it is because a detachment, right? It was a detachment that was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Everton Conger. He was like an experienced intelligence officer. So this detachment of soldiers actually arrives in Virginia near Garrett's farm. When Booth finds out about this, him and
Harold,
basically like run away to the woods real quick. And Garrett's like, wait, what just happened? Like
and
he's
they
kind of
come
like,
back and they're
that's
like,
weird.
something's going on, yeah.
And then they like that night when this detachment of soldiers leaves, they come back. And at that point, you have Garrett's like, yeah, I don't want you guys staying here anymore. And he kind of feels a little suspicious as to what is going on.
He puts him in the barn. But there's also a story that came out I was reading from Garrett's 11-year-old son, Richard. He was actually there at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
He later becomes a Baptist minister. And he says that like all the Confederate mail delivery had ceased when the Confederacy collapsed. So actually the Garretts had no idea that Lincoln was even assassinated, all right? Mm-hmm. And when they were having dinner one night with Booth, they learned of the surrender of the Confederate Army. So that's kind of like that's the end of the war. And they learn about Booth's attempt to save the Confederacy by assassinating Lincoln, right? Yeah. So they learn of his death, and they also learn of the big reward. And Booth said that Garrett displayed no reaction when asked if the other family member would turn in the fugitive, but some of the older brothers said, "Yeah, we would because we could really use that money." So that's when, and this is how they acted. He said that Booth had the plan to maybe run to Mexico. This is just all hearsay. Obviously, they don't know if this is actually like true or not, but it just kind of gives it a bit of idea. This is a firsthand account of someone who was actually there talking about a little bit that, when they're talking about the money, then people start to like change a little bit. But he knew something was up. Richard Garrett definitely knew there was something going on. These guys are not who they said they are. He said, you can spend the night, but you have to spend the night in the barn.
Yep. Well, and so as they're in the barn this other night, because again, after first being in a house, so the next few nights they're in the barn, And in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., April 26th, Conger basically and his detachment of federal cavalry arrives at the Garrett's
Well,
house.
because they track down Jet. They track
Yep.
down Willie Jet, and they interrogate him, which probably means they beat the heck out of him, right?
And he's
So
like,
they
"Yeah, there's these
interrogate
two
him,
guys. One
and
this
he
has a
tells them,
limp." Yeah.
yeah, he tells me, yeah, I dropped him off at the Garrett farm, so that's it. They like, all right, now we got him, and
And again, they don't know
they
if this is
go there.
Booth yet. Like they still think
Yeah,
it's these, but they know it's
yeah,
Booth. But like they don't know it's Booth.
yeah.
Um, so they get there and they're actually like telling Garrett like, "Where are these people that are staying in your house?" He's like, "No one's staying at my house right now." And they actually place a rope around his neck, like, "We'll kill you." This is what U.S. cavalry's doing.
Yeah,
Like,
like
"We'll
we don't
kill
care.
you
Like, yeah,
if you
we're not
don't
dealing
tell
with
us where
this.
you're hiding these people." And then finally, his son's like, "Well, we did tell these two soldiers that they could stay in our barn," and that's what basically sets up the last hours of John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah,
Um,
so they go there. They surround the barn. Right,
they
Harold
do.
gives up right away. David Harold gives
Yep.
up right away. Booth refuses. Doesn't I believe Booth doesn't he? I saw something that he actually challenged the
He does. I actually just read like the whole thing about it. It was pretty
he
insane.
challenged Union Commander for his freedom, right?
Yep, he
He's like,
did.
I'll yeah, and they challenged him to a duel
He
for
literally
his
said,
freedom, and
"You ready? Because I
God,
got this." He goes,
yeah,
"Captain," he called out, right? And he goes, and I quote, "I know you to be a brave man, and I believe you to be honorable. I am a cripple." And then he kind of goes in, "I have got but one leg. If you will withdraw your men in line 100 yards from the door, I will come out and fight you." Like that was his thing. Like he was going to basically have a duel with him. It's like, if you'll take your men 50 yards from the door, I'll come out and fight you. Give me a chance for my life. Um, and
yeah,
Baker, like, they
yeah. Well,
declined.
he's like, no, and then they set the barn on fire.
Yep.
So there's like, no, and get out here. We're not messing with you anymore. And they set the barn actually on fire. So
Yeah.
that kind of like, all right, now you're gonna come out no matter what. And I guess when he's in there, conflicting reports, right? Some say he runs out, others say that he's still inside when he gets shot,
He
right?
apparently, based on what I saw, was like about to get out when he does
Coming to the
get,
door, yeah.
yeah, he gets shot by a trigger happy soldier,
Yeah,
basically.
Sergeant Boston Corbett, which Conger actually wanted him to be brought up on charges because they
Yeah.
wanted to take Booth alive.
And he lied
They
to him too
wanted to.
because
He said he saw him reaching for a gun or a pistol or something.
exactly. And then afterwards, like as Conger runs in, and it's like Booth's like, because he heard the shot that this guy shot through like this space in between two wooden planks. Booth's on the ground in a fiery thing. They drag him out of the fire, and Conger, the commanding officer, is like, "Why on earth did you shoot him?" And the other guy's like, I did not shoot him. Like he shot himself. He might have, he was going for a gun." It's like, fishy. And later
Yeah,
on, he actually said, like, "Yeah, I shot him. God told me to do it."
he saw it. He shot him. And he shot him right through his neck, which just like destroyed his vertebrae. He severed his spinal cord. I mean,
Yep.
he didn't kill him instantly. It paralyzed him, but it was a
Yep.
death shot. That was it.
It
He wasn't.
was.
You're not recovering from that, especially in 1865.
And this is kind of interesting too, because, and I always thought that this was the last words, but then when you start looking into the reports of this, firsthand accounts, so basically he's laying there bleeding profusely from his neck, and the U.S. Army men kind of get really close to his mouth, and after several attempts, he finally speaks, and he said, "Tell mother I die for my country."
My country, yeah.
And Conger like wants to desperately to confirm the accuracy of what Booth had said, as if these are his last words. So he basically keeps on repeating it. "Tell mother I die for my country." Like, is that what you said? And then they say again, "Is that what you said?" Booth's like, "Yes," he whispers. So they're like, "Okay, these are Booth's last words. Tell mother I die for my country." Tobacco Barn is fully ablaze right now. So they grab Booth by the arms, the shoulders, and legs and kind of like march him to the farmhouse. They climb up the stairs and laid Booth flat on the wood plank
On the
porch,
porch,
basically. Yeah.
basically. Yeah, that's where
And
he's gonna.
that's where he's going to die. But the blood is like pulling from his, pulling from
The
his
whole
head
neck, yeah.
everywhere. The Garrett girls carry an old straw mattress from the house and laid it on the porch for him. So instead of putting him on the mattress, they actually like kind of folded it and put it under Booth's head and shoulders. And that's when Booth started kind of reviving a little bit, and he started to talk in a whisper, but talking. And then he asks if they could like roll him
He
over to
wants
the
to see his
side.
hands, right? He wants to
Yep.
see his
He
hands.
wants his hands. They wants to be rolled over to the side, and he's actually trying to cough, but it's not letting him cough. So he asked them if they could put their hand on his throat to press it down. So one of the soldiers does, and he like says harder, but they do, and he just still can't get a cough out. However, the soldier says, like, look, open your mouth, like, let me look in your mouth if there's any blood anywhere. And they realize the inside of the mouth was actually okay. So they tell Booth, like, all right, you're not going to choke on your blood, it's fine. But it wasn't the point. I mean, it severed his spine.
That he was going to die anyway. Yeah, and I know they bring his hands to his face, right? He asks for that. He says useless, and then I think he passes approximately 7:15 a.m. And that's it. He's dead, and then this is going to get published that the assassin of Lincoln killed.
Which is nuts because they really want. Yeah, you're right. He was my hands and useless, and they said those are the last things. He said useless. That's looking at his hands, and then he like gasps, and that's it. But the bottom line is, they didn't want him dead. Like,
no, they wanted to see if there were more conspirators. They wanted to see if this was tied in with, let's say, the Confederate government in some way. So there was a lot of information they wanted to get from Booth, and they could only get from Booth because they do interrogate Harold, and he eventually gets hanged.
Yep.
Along with, I think, 8 other conspirators.
Yeah,
right?
and Mary Surratt gets hung as well, and she's actually the first woman ever to be assassinated, well, not assassinated, but killed by the United States federal government. Interesting enough. Booth's body is taken to Washington, D.C. It's secretly buried in like a city's old penitentiary. No one's really told where it's buried. And then 4 years later, President Andrew Johnson actually returns Booth's body to his family. And today, John Wilkes Booth is buried in an unmarked grave in the Booth family plot at Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore, Maryland. No one actually knows which grave is his.
There's been a lot of
there's some people who said that they were him, right?
Yeah, the people say they were him. So there's a lot of people that want to like raise the grave and like do DNA testing because there was this one theory that it was a lookalike that died, and he actually survived and went by the name of James William Boyd or something like that. No, David E. George. I'm sorry. And he left and he started living in. First, he was called John St. Helen, and he lived in Texas.
Yeah,
and then he got ill, right? Then almost died, and then confessed that he's actually John Wilkes Booth. But then recovered. She's like, oh man, everyone knows I'm John Wilkes Booth now, so I'm leaving. And then he went to Oklahoma, called himself David E. George, and then he wound up committing suicide. And it was basically just made up. I've kind of found too that it's because this one guy had St. Helen's body mummified and called it the man who killed Lincoln, kind of sent it like a carnival sideshows.
Yeah, they said it was just sitting there for people to see.
Yeah, because there was later a lot of people who knew who Booth was, plus Booth's own family identified the body and said, yes, that's
another thing. Yeah,
that's our son.
That's what's crazy because as soon as he was killed, he was delivered by USS Montauk, I think, picked up, brought over to Washington, D.C.'s Naval Yard, and there was a pretty extensive identification and autopsy process. Like, and they basically even determined, like, he died from paralysis. It was the cause of death. Like, he stopped breathing because of paralysis. So we knew for a fact that that was his body, the real guy that was shot. So anybody that showed up afterwards, like this guy you're talking about, definitely was not Booth. But we still don't know where Booth is. I mean, we don't know.
Well, they don't know the exact spot of the grave.
Yeah.
I guess some people, they know where it's buried because they do want to exhume it. It keeps on being denied, though.
Interesting. So all of his possessions were sent over to the War Department. Including actually his diary, which he kept writing even when he was during his 12-day manhunt. And what's interesting is that it eventually becomes lost at the War Department, and then it's rediscovered in 1867, so a couple years later. But when it's rediscovered, it is rediscovered at the War Department, but it's missing 43 sheets, which is like 86 pages front and back, right? Of the entire diary. And the people are like, wow, we don't know why it's missing. The forensic analysis indicates that they were cut with a knife. Secretary of War Stanley claimed that the sheets were missing when he received the diary in 1965, but others kind of speculate that they perhaps have been removed because of what they contained, potentially some information about conspirators that might have pointed to a larger government conspiracy. Again, it's one of those like, JFK versus...
Yeah, every time something's going to happen where they don't have total answers, there's going to be different theories are going to branch off from that,
Nuts.
And that's basically what's going to happen there.
So yeah, there's your
link. But that's basically how Booth got captured. He got taken out, basically. And he was going to get killed regardless. They were going to hang him.
Yeah, but it was supposed to show like the the American, judicial system and how well it works. It never got to that.
Well, yeah, I think it would have been a military tribunal though, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Huh?
Right? Yeah, they just kill him. I mean,
Didn't something happen to the guy that actually killed him? Didn't he have like a pretty bad life or something crazy happened?
yeah. Well, he wasn't exactly the best people. He was kind of
No, I
court-martialed, I
remember.
think. Not court-martialed, but taken out later on.
Yes, I know something happened to him.
Boston.
But anyway, that's for another day, I guess. So that's a nice short podcast about the 12 days of the biggest
Final 12.
manhunt
Yeah,
in
a little bit
American
about
history.
what's going on there, the manhunt. Maybe they had all 10,000 federal troops get involved in this. It was a big deal, obviously, but it was huge. They were going to find this guy. And they probably, they were supposed to take him alive, but just to take him alive, it's a lot easier said than done to do that.
No.
I was always shocked at the number of people that were like, at least in the beginning, that were helping him.
Yeah, but that quickly turned. But you know what?
Yes,
No one
yes.
really turned him in for the 100,000.
They didn't turn him in. They if they said anything, it was because they were being interrogated or because, they were more threatened with violence than anything else. It wasn't the money that turned them in. And a lot of people who knew he was, they didn't know. They said, you can't stay here, but I'm not going to help you, but I'm not going to turn you in either, But also, like back then, how are you going to turn someone in?
Yeah, right.
Like, it's easier said than done. You can't just call the cops and try to keep the guy here. One of those things.
Well, today, the house where he was killed at is no longer there. There's a historic marker that says
One of
that
those plaques,
here
yeah.
you once stood a house where, the Garrett's place where John Wilkes Booth, assassin of Lincoln, was cornered by Union soldiers and killed. So that's gone. It is near U.S. Route 301 near Port Royal. Interesting. Anyway, so that's it. Thank you very much, guys, once again, for tuning in to our little podcast. And we really do appreciate it. So if you guys ever need to contact us, please feel free to do so. You can reach us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. Please leave us a review wherever you listen to this podcast. We really do greatly appreciate those. And we hope you have an amazing week. Till next time, guys. Bye.
Stay safe, everyone.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.